Bom dia, sejam todos bem-vindos e bem-vindas ao 13º Colóquio de Estudos Vikings e Escandinavos. Meu nome é André Oliveira, sou doutorando orientado ao professor Johnny Langor pela UFRN. Eu estou aqui com o Michael Micci, professor Dr. Michael Micci, que será o conferencista de agora. E sem muito mais delongas, eu gostaria de apresentar o professor Micci, para quem não conhece ele. O professor Michael Micci, ele é doutor em literatura islandesa pela Universidade da Islândia, onde examinou a representação espacial das Íslendingasögur islandesas indígenas. Atualmente é professor assistente de filologia germânica na Universidade de Bergamo. Publicou amplamente sobre literatura nórdica antiga e linguística germânica, além de ter editado e traduzido para o italiano a Vínland Saga e a Íslendingasögur também, e também lecionou filologia germânica e língua e literatura islandesa em diversas universidades italianas. Nós então iremos começar nossa segunda conferência, Memory and Fiction in the Vínland Sagas. Teacher Michael, now you can have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. I would like to thank Johnny Langer for inviting me and all the team that has welcomed me so warmly to this event and helped me out through all the technical aspects of it. Yes, I'm here today to speak a little bit about the Vínland Sagas. These two, first of all, I apologize to the audience for the English, but I have literally no skill in either Portuguese or Spanish, literally zero, which is my bad. I will need to make up for this in the future. But anyways, I hope you will understand well and feel free to ask any questions that I will be happy to answer afterwards. So yes, what are the Vínland Sagas? What do we mean by this term? Of course, it's a comprehensive term that has to do with two texts, two Icelandic narratives, which are likely composed in the 13th century, but are preserved in later manuscripts. These two texts are Eiríks saga rauða, the saga of Eiríkur the Red, and the Grænlendinga saga, so the saga of the Greenlanders. Both texts recount the voyages of Norse people, Norse settlers, who sail westward from Iceland and Greenland in search of fertile and climatically favorable lands, of course. While they share a number of characteristics and plot elements, they differ in several respects, which has prompted scholars to investigate the relationships, and especially their relationship with the historical explorations of Icelanders and Greenlanders westwards towards the new continent. Of course, this topic has caused a lot of debate. Here is a picture of Leifur Eiríksson, the son of Eiríkur the Red, the protagonist of Eiríks saga rauða, who is sailing towards Vinland, towards what we now know to be North America. So the fact that more than 400 years before Columbus, some Nordic people might have reached the coast of America and settled there for a while, has of course sparked a lot of debate and interest in the scholarly community, and not only. That's why these Vínland Sagas are some of the most studied and analyzed texts in the history of the field of Viking and medieval Icelandic and Old Norse Icelandic studies. A lot has been said already, probably everything, but there's always some new perspectives that we can offer to the topic. For instance, one recent development that we have worked on in a volume that I have recently published with a colleague of medieval Latin studies. It's called Quante Americhe, Europei nel Nuovo Mondo prima di Colombo, fra storia e invenzione. The title is Italian, but we have papers inside both English and Italian, so it's accessible to a wider audience. a development, as I was saying, in recent year is the mention of a land called Markalada beyond the Atlantic Ocean in a text by a Dominican priest, Italian Dominican priest called Galvano Fiamma, about 100 years before the Columbus's travels. So it might be that the explorations that so the text that I was talking about is Chronica Universalis, so Universal Chronicle by this Dominican friar, and but anyways, the fact that this priest has written about it might mean that merchants, sailors from Northern Europe who traveled down southward to Italy, probably Genoa, which was a very pivotal city for trades, commercial trades, might have heard and retold the story of these travels of a faraway land full of grapes and wheat and a very fertile landscape, which has attracted a lot of attention and, of course, fascination already in the Middle Ages. But what we have always debated about, especially until the 60s and 70s of the past century, is the fact that was this travel really made? Was this trip really made, in fact, in reality? Or is it just literary invention? So did these Nordic people actually reach America? Were they aware that it was a new continent? Did they settle there for a while? These questions have really been at the center of the debate for years. And this is one of the reasons why these two sagas have always been mostly been studied as possible historical sources, bearers of hints and traces of historical facts, realities, or plausible information about these trips from Greenland and Iceland to the coasts of Canada, Labrador, and Newfoundland. Roughly those areas. Basically, these travels have been at the center of the analysis, and only few articles and contributions and volumes have been dedicated to the sagas as literary products per se, which means founded probably in a nucleus of real travels, of real facts, but also embellished and elaborated in a complex way and richly elaborated as literary products to be told and used and read by the Icelandic community of the 13th century when these stories were written. Another aspect that has been pivotal in terms of the reliability of the sagas as sources is the fact that even if we decided that these sagas tell the truth, completely tell the truth, which is of course difficult to state, but anyways, let's say that they can be used as historical documents, we still have a huge gap of hundreds of years between the days these travels were made, which is around the year 1000, if we follow the text, the sagas, and the archaeological findings, and the moment when these texts were written down, which is, as I was saying, the 13th century. So we have at least a 200-year gap between the events the sagas told and the moment when these sagas were written down. We cannot possibly believe that in these 200 years, nothing has been changed in the oral recountings of these stories before somebody decided to make them into literature. So it is really hard to not realize this, and it is really hard to find then in the texts what is to believe as plausible, as realistic, as as historical and what instead is invention. So can we really do that? That's a question per se. Is it possible at all to distinguish between these elements? It's hard, and it also depends on the perspective one decides to take. In this paper, I would like to take a perspective that's more literary, that analyzes these texts more as literature than historical recountings. Because, as I was saying before, these 200 years of oral retelling, because we have to understand that in the year 1000, Icelandic was just converting to Christianity, and Icelanders did not have the technology to write manuscripts, the technology to write these stories down on paper. So the fact that it happened 200 years later means that at the beginning it was just oral retelling, and there wasn't a real written record of this. So I believe it is too hard to really distinguish what's the core realistic, the realistic core of these narratives and the literary invention. So seeing these products as literature is can still give us a lot of information, a lot of perspectives on the society that produced these texts, that enjoyed these texts, that read these texts, and what they thought of their past, and what was the inheritance, the legacy of their history, of their histories of the period of the history of Icelandic colonization, Icelandic explorations, and the settlement from Norway to Iceland to Greenland, and then ultimately to the new continent. So it was a period during the colonization of Iceland, where the explorations during these years between the end of the 9th century and the 12th century, more or less, where the explorations were wide and probably reached the new continent as well. But so I think it's more interesting to see how this legacy, what traces this legacy have left on the Icelandic people who wrote and read these stories, than to go look for little hints of historicity in the texts. As I was saying, the question is pivotal. Was the journey really made? As Sverri Thomasson has asked himself in 2001. Did it only exist in the mind of the poet? And where are the distinctions in travel narratives between that which is demonstrably real and that which is not, and which positivists call fantasy? So the Nord Icelandic sources within the medieval tradition of Mirabilia and Miracula are plenty, and these texts appear actually in manuscripts, where we have a lot of other sagas that tell us about marvelous things, events happening, or miracles, life of saints. So if we believe that the position of these texts in their manuscript contexts can tell us something about the way they were perceived by the society that produced these manuscripts, we can easily say that where they probably thought these as only partially true stories, and maybe also they already thought in the Middle Ages that they might have a percentage of invention and creative invention and fantasy, some fantasy aspects inside these stories. So there's a syncretism, as I was just saying, of fantastic and realistic elements, which is a typical feature, if you think about it, of the sagas of Icelanders, especially the youngest ones. The overall realistic tones of the sagas doesn't mean that the fantastic is not there, that elements of, as I was saying, marvelous, miracles, supernatural, could not be inserted organically in the objective style of the sagas of the Íslendingasögur, the sagas of Icelanders. There's definitely, as I was saying, a narrative nucleus, but I would like to borrow the perspective of Gísli Sigurðsson, scholar who has studied these sagas a lot in the previous years, saying that after all, if we take off all the aspects that might have been creative invention, after all, what we remain with, what we are left with, is that a very simple fact, that Norsemen from Greenland reached the coast of North America at some point between the late 10th century and the early 11th century. We really can't say much more than this. And because we cannot say for certain that all other aspects of these narratives are certainly not invention. What we know is, of course, has been confirmed by archaeological findings. As I was saying earlier, between the 60s and 70s of the last centuries, we had archaeological excavations at Lanso Meadow in Canada, coordinated by Helge and Anne-Stine Ingstad. And this evidence showed us that there was in fact a settlement in that area of Norse travelers around the year 1000, more or less. And so that partially these stories are true. But this is mostly it. Even if we look carefully at the archaeological findings, we can't say much more, because the sagas are not about the daily life of these people, what things they produced and used, the artifacts that they had with them. The stories are about something else, and they are much more ideological than historical. We're going to see it in a bit. So basically, these archaeological findings were, of course, I don't want to diminish the importance of these archaeological findings, because they were extremely important, because we know that there's a narrative nucleus that is based on reality, on the reality of this exploration, and that in fact Norsemen did reach the new continent at some point at the turn of the century. But that's it. There's not much more we can say. And I would like to move on. So the question of oral transmission has been debated a lot. This is particularly valid for the Vínland Sagas, but is also valid for all Icelandic sagas, all Íslendingasögur, the family sagas, so-called family sagas, because these sagas retell the stories of the first colonizers of Iceland, the first explorers who colonized the island. So there are stories in these genres of sagas that do have some roots in the reality of the explorations, but we don't know how much. That's the same for all the texts, for most texts, but even more so for the Vínland Sagas. Some of you might know about the debate which has animated the scholarly community, especially in the past decades, between free prose scholars and book prose scholars. Very briefly, the free prose scholars would promote the theory according to which most sagas' contents are based on oral accounts of events which took place, in the case of the most popular ones, the family sagas, between the end of the 9th century and shortly after the conversion, 11th century. On the contrary, book prose supporters would stress the purely literary character of these texts, diminishing the component of oral transmission significantly, if not at all. In fact, it seems impossible to embrace either of these theories. Both positions have been outdated nowadays in favor of a more complex, layered, and context-driven analysis. There's a mistake in the slide. I apologize for that. It's context-driven analysis. With the aid of interdisciplinary approaches, such as today's paper, which would as also mentioned, a little bit of the archaeological aspect to it. So we try to mix archaeology and literature to find some reality to these stories, but sometimes this reality is much less, tells us much less than what we would like to know, So I would like to borrow Ralph Connor's words here when he says something really interesting, I think. The question of whether medieval sagas were composed, intended, and received, I'm quoting, as fiction or as history must be answered anew for each text as well as each so-called genre, and with references to manuscript context and as well as narrative content. So the tenor and direction of written scholarship suggests that a gratifying decline in the number of blanket assumptions being made about certain kinds of saga being history or fiction in some essentialist way, and an exciting increase in both the number and subtlety of investigations into how people in the Middle Ages used and perceived these narratives, which is exactly what I was telling you about, how this legacy, the legacy of these travels, is perceived in the manuscript, in the authors who wrote down these stories. Just beware, as Larrington says, Caroline Larrington rightfully says also, that although the modern reader cannot be confident about what happened to Leifur, Thorvald, and all the rest of the characters of these two sagas in a phenomenological sense, so much can be learned from the sagas about the 13th century Icelandic authors' modes of representations. Also, attempts to tell the truth are not the truth itself. This is really important, in my opinion. Little can be concluded about the reality of the Vínland journeys, for the encounter with the New World is mediated through several different types of textual filters, starting from the oral textual transmission. So basically, let's see. Let's start from Ralph O'Connor's words and do look at the manuscript context of these two texts. Grænlendinga saga survives in a single manuscript, only one, but one of the most important and most popular manuscripts of the Icelandic history, which is the Flateyjar book, which was written in the late 14th century. It is a manuscript that entails legendary materials, sagas focused on the exploration and settlement of foreign lands, including Grænlendinga saga. Then we have Eiríks saga rauða, which is featured in Hauk's book and Skaldholt's book. These are the three manuscripts I just mentioned. And as I was saying earlier, and as Caroline Larrington has demonstrated, these two manuscript contexts do feature a lot of miracula and mirabilia. So we might believe that the audience itself was not completely convinced that this was, in fact, that these texts were to be perceived as historical ones, maybe more ideological ones, and maybe more interesting for their the messages that they wanted to convey, rather than the historical part of the narratives, the historical aspects of it. So, what are we looking for? The aim is not to seek historical facts, but rather to reconstruct a process of storytelling from an initial narrative core, possibly oral, as I was saying, to two distinct literary elaboration. This is as close as we can get, I think, to the alleged historical event through a literary analysis. I would like today to focus on, especially on, the narrative devices that characterize these texts, which means a set of storytelling strategies and techniques that have impact on the plot and the development of the characters, their knowledge, experience, and social dynamics. Why are these narrative devices so important? They are so important because they are devices that the authors use to sort of give a direction to the story and to the moral evaluations of the characters and the events. So they propose an evaluation of the characters and the events to the readers through also the strategies that they apply in telling the stories, how they make the characters move, what strategies they use to make certain events happen, why these events that happen are so important to the message they want to convey. So contents and devices are intertwined, as you can imagine, because devices are strategies to direct the contents of the sagas, intertwined and influence each other in the light of what the function of each literary text may be, the culture and ideology underlying it. So this is exactly what I was talking about. The narrative contents may be inspired by the primary world. Here I am using the story world and world building theory. It's a terminology that I think it's still very intuitive, even if you're not familiar with this theory. Narrative contents may be inspired by the primary world, the real world. So by that factual nucleus that I told you about, but narrative devices are used to build a secondary world with more or less adherence to the former. Before we go to some of these narrative devices, there's an important brief digression that I have to make about the plots, the synopsis of the two texts. So as you can see, at the beginning of the story of both sagas, the plot is really overlapping mostly. So Eiríks' family leaves Norway and settles in Iceland. Eiríkur's legal disputes in Iceland cause him to be outlawed. Then he sets sail westward from Snæfellsnes and reaches Greenland, where he settles. We have the retellings of some of his years after that. Again, he ends up in Greenland, a name that he chose to encourage other Icelanders to depart and settle the new land. One of the main differences between these two narratives is that after Eiríkur has settled in Iceland and then Greenland, the expeditions to the new land, to Vínland, begin. And in Grænlendinga saga, we have, sorry, 6 expeditions overall, while we have only three expeditions who are told in Eiríks saga rauða. In the first saga, which is also believed to be the first saga who has been written, Grænlendinga saga is by many believed to be the earliest of the two, and who has influenced then Eiríks saga rauða, or maybe not. Some scholars do believe that Eiríks saga rauða is inspired by Grænlendinga saga and has simplified a little bit the plot. Others believe that the two sagas have been generated independently, starting from the oral retelling of these journeys. So we have 6 expeditions to Vínland. It is Bjarni, a character called Bjarni, who discovers Vínland in 985 in Grænlendinga saga, while it is Leifur, Eiríkur's son, who discovers the new land in Eiríks saga rauða. Thorvaldur and Thorstein, 2 of Eiríkur's sons, fail their expeditions in Grænlendinga saga. It is only Thorstein's who failed the expedition in Eiríks saga rauða. Thorfinnur's expedition and settlement is told in both sagas. So Thorfinnur is not one of Eiríkur's sons, but it's a very prominent character still, called Karlsefni, which means the promising man. So it's a very positive figure. And then finally, Freydis Eiríksdóttir, so the daughter of Eiríkur, and her husband reach Vínland, the new lands in Grænlendinga saga. So 6 expeditions against only 3. In both retellings, Eiríkur falls from his horse and is not able to depart. He would have departed with Leifur in Grænlendinga saga or Thorstein in Eiríks saga rauða, but still he never gets to reach the new lands. Then we have Leifur and Thorfinnur, who in the 2 different plots find the new lands and gave them a name, Helluland, from the fact that it's full of rocks. Markland, flat, full of forest and sandy beaches. Be careful that this Markland is the exact same land that is mentioned by Galvano Fiamma, the Italian priest, in his 14th century text, which is one of the reasons why this has sparked so much interest in recent years. Vínland, finally, the rich land with no ice in winters and full of fish. Leifur comes back to Brattahlid in Greenland. These 2 events, on his way back, he saves a few men after a shipwreck, and he is called, therefore, the lucky Leifur Heppni. This happens in both sagas. Then in both sagas, although the two episodes are set in different positions in the plot, we have a woman called Guðríður, who occupies a central role as the wife of Thorfinnur, Karlsefni, the Promising, and one of the few Christian explorers, one of the few people who have already converted to Christianity in Greenland, and one of the few Christian explorers of Vinland. Guðríður loses her second husband to a harsh famine that strikes their settlement in Greenland. Shortly after, he returns as a draugur, a revenant, to deliver a prophecy to Guðríður about her future with Thorfinnur and their descendants. In Grænlendinga saga, he says to Guðríður, do not marry any Greenlander and move back to Iceland, build a church there and become a nun. In Eiríks saga rauða, the prophecy is, do not marry any Greenlander and move back to Iceland, become a Christian, bury Thorstein as a Christian, which means bury, he asks her to bury himself as a Christian in a Christian way, leave his goods to the church. Then we have Thorvaldur, son of Eiríkur, who sails to Vinland, and in Eiríks saga we have Thorfinnur, and we have a few encounters with the indigenous, the Eskimos, the Skrællingar, called Skrællingar. These are probably some of the most accurate episodes in the sagas, talking about the historicity of them. There are some aspects about their behavior, the behavior of the native people, and even their clothes that seems to be really carefully described. Also because they probably were so different from the settlers in their ways, in their clothes, that this has struck the attention of travelers, and probably some of the details were so exotic to the sailors that even the subsequent retellings kept some of the key features of these encounters. These encounters are initially peaceful in both sagas, except for the fact that in the end there's always some reason for a fight to start between the two groups, the explorers and the native, the Skrællingar. Then we finally have Freydis, the daughter of Eiríkur, journey to Vinland. In both sagas, she's a very, very cruel and domineering figure, a very violent woman, as you can see. But we will address her later in the presentation in a bit. Finally, Karlsefni moves back to Iceland with Guðríður. Karlsefni is Thorfinnur the Promising. And we have the genealogies of their descendants. So the aspects which are common to both narratives: Eirik's origin and movement to Norway, Iceland, Greenland; Leivor's stay and training in Norway. Leivor, his son, is said to be staying and training in Norway at the court of Olavur Tryggvason the Saint, so a Christian king who encourages Leivor to move to Greenland and Christianize Greenland. So this is a very important aspect. Leivor's trip to Vinland and the rescue of the shipwreck victims; Thorfinnur's trip to Vinland and his relationship with Guðríður; interactions with indigenous people that end up in violence; Thorstein's bond with Guðríður and his prophecy; Vinland's pleasant landscape and climate; harshness of life outside the established settlements. So the unknown, the dangers of the unknown; final decision to give up the colonization of Vinland; and the genealogies that connected the characters to contemporary Icelanders. So I have isolated a few narrative devices in these two plots that help us understand what was probably the message of these authors, and how and why these authors elaborated and molded shaped the contents of these stories that they had heard, probably orally, through genealogies, the use of forces of nature, the insertion of prophecies and visions, the figures of Guðríður and Freydis, the two women, and the descriptions of the landscapes. Genealogies are a strategy that connects the notable figures from the early period of colonization with the saga's audience or the patrons of the texts. It's a typical feature of the Icelandic saga, the Íslendingasögur. They appear in the prologues and in the epilogues. In the prologues, they tend to focus on tracing the origins of the figure who will become the central characters, while the epilogues are devoted to outlining their distinguished lineages and connecting these characters from the stories to the famous figures of 13th century Iceland very often. So to connect them to the Icelandic present of the readers. So to give this sort of fascinating thread that goes from the years of the colonization to the present Icelanders. So we have an example here in the prologue of Eiríks saga. Eiríkur is not mentioned until chapter 2. There was a man named Thorvaldur. He was the son of Ásvaldur, son of Ulfur, son of Öxna Þórir. It's not the Lord of the Rings, but the Lord of the Rings has taken this habit somewhere, obviously, from Icelandic sagas. His son was called Eiríkur the Red. We have some other examples of genealogies. For example, in Eiríks saga chapter 14, the daughter of Snorri Karlsefnisson, this is the end of the saga, the epilogue, was Alfríður, mother of Bishop Thorlakur Runolfsson. They had another son named Thorbjörn, whose daughter was Þórunn, mother of Bishop Björn, blah, 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 blah. This is really long. Anyway, this is a way to anchor the characters in in the specificity of the present of the Icelandic readers, because Bishop Thorlakur is a real figure, a notable figure of the Icelandic present of the readers, I mean, the contemporary readers. Bishop Björn also is a real figure, and Bishop Brandur as well. So you see how this is important for the readers or the patrons of these texts to see a connection with this, in part, legendary past. I would use this word carefully here, but with these adventures of their forefathers. In Grænlendinga saga, there's another. I put another example of genealogy at the beginning, at the prologue of the saga, but I don't really have time to go through all of these. Then, but I would like to stress one thing. This strategy of using genealogies is important, as I was saying, to create a connection with the Icelandic present, also to anchor these characters geographically to specific geographical locations like Hólar, Skálholt, the bishoprics in Iceland. These bishops used to operate in some locations in Iceland. So there is also, as you can see here, Reykjanes. There's also a very practical connection to the Icelandic present of the readers. The process of colonization emerges as a crucial element of Icelandic identity, a fundamental point of references used to ennoble the protagonist image, because if you make them look as descendants of the colonizers, of the free people who left Norway to live as free men in Iceland and Greenland, the people who were so brave to colonize the new land, you create an emotional connection to the past through the characters of the story. So it's a fundamental point of reference, as I was said, to ennoble the protagonist images and by extension their descendants. The epilogue of Grænlendinga saga, which I have not written here, does not differ significantly, though, except for the greater emphasis that is placed on good reader choice of a religious life upon her return from Vínland. So good reader, the female figure that I told you about some minutes ago, she is told to undertake a pilgrimage to Rome and become a nunna or einsetukona, so a nun in seclusion, another another important aspect, because these two sagas are imbued in Christian ideology, as we will see. One aspect that connects these sagas with Christian ideology is the fact that Leifur, as I was saying, Eiríksson, who is the founder, the finder, the one who discovers Vinland in one of the two sagas, he's converted to Christianity in Norway. This is a very important part of the plot. And he's told by King Olafur the Saint that he should go to Greenland to his father and convert the land. But on his way there, he is mysteriously blown off course to the shores of the new lands. So basically, as if it is as if a divine force intervenes to move Leifur's boat from the direction that the trajectory that he had to Greenland, and then it makes it move to Vinland, to the new lands, and this is a way to make him not only the lucky finder of these new lands, but also the lucky savior of the people who he finds in the shipwreck. So this is a way to sort of makes his figure look particularly good and generous and lucky, and as if to say to the audience, he is one of the only Christian characters in the story. He is one of the best ones. Good things happen to him, and the forces of nature favor him in his explorations because he is a positive figure, because he is one of the few Christians in the story. Let us remind that these stories were written down in the 13th century. Iceland had been converted to Christianity for 200 years. So we cannot possibly think that this ideology did not filter into the text. It would absolutely be not realistic to think that. Also, Bjarni is also favored by the good forces of nature. His father is said to be a Christian, the father of Bjarni. So this is another important example. He's very favored by good weather in his exploration when he discovers Vinland in Grænlendinga saga. Then we have some examples where the forces of nature seem to move to be used as ways to move the plot in directions where the plot is supposed to go, as if the author says, the story needs to go to a certain point. I need to find creative ways to make the stories go in a certain direction. For instance, Thorstein, Eiríksson, who is the first husband of Gudr, the second husband, or depending on the version of the story, the husband of Gudridur, needs to die because of the famine and the epidemic that takes place in Greenland at some point. So his journey to Vinland must not go well. We need to find narrative strategies to make him go back to Greenland so that this core element of the story must happen. Why is this a core element of the story? Why Thorstein has to die for the epidemic? Why Thorstein has to give his prophecy as a draugur, as a revenant, while dying or right after his death to Gudridur? Because his words become at some point the words of the author, the words that bring to the surface the ideology of these texts. And I would like to stress this particularly talking about prophecies and visions. He says, so that all could hear, this is Thorstein as a draugur, as a revenant, that those men were blessed who kept their faith, for all help and mercy followed it, though he added that many did not keep it well, meaning the faith. Also, it is no proper costume, as has prevailed here in Greenland since Christianity came, to bury men in unconsecrated ground with little ceremony. I wish to be brought to a church along with the others who have died here. So the fact that, and also he tells Gudridur to convert, bury him, give her goods to the church, to the Catholic Church, to go to the pilgrimage where she decides to become a nun. So this prophecy that he states are so important because it gives the temperature to the reader of where the ideology of the author stands, which is with the Christians, with the Christian characters who have just been converted in the saga, as if they are the ones who are going to take the Icelandic society onto the future, which is the future of the present readers, of the present authors, the Christian society of the 13th century Iceland. Going back to the forces of nature, another episode that confirms this is the beached whale. The beached whale in Eiríks saga rauða, where at some point during Thorfinnur Karlsefni expedition, the group reaches a barren and inhospitable area. One member of the expedition, Thorhallur, prays to Thor for sustenance, and soon after, a whale washes ashore. And he says, this is Thorhallur who speaks. Have you seen that the red-bearded one, which is Thor, just proved more generous than your Christ? This is the reward for the poem I composed about Thor, my patron. He has rarely failed me. So he says, this beached whale that we can eat as sustenance now has been sent by Thor because I prayed him, I composed a poem for him. But what happens is that most of the crew, some of them are Christians, reject the whale's remains, refusing to eat it, and instead turns to pray God. The group then splits. Some of them go with Thorfinnur, and some of them go with Thorhallur. Thorfinnur goes, which is who is a Christian, continues southwards, where he finds an area of rich vines, fish, and wild wheat, which he names Hope. Meanwhile, Thorhallur, hope not in English, not like hope, but hope in the Icelandic spelling, which means something else. But just to be sure, this is not so not like hope for the future or stuff like that. Anyways, meanwhile, Thorhallur and his companions sail east, trusting that Thor will protect them, will keep protecting them. The ship, though, is driven by storms to the coast of Ireland, where they are enslaved and tortured. A storm from the west. So they reach Iceland, they are beaten, mistreated, and Thorhallur dies there. So basically, this is a narrative that clearly frames his death as a consequence of misplaced faith, reinforcing the saga's Christian perspective. Thorfinnur, who is a Christian who doesn't believe in Thor's help, will thrive, will go to the south and find vines, wheat, and flourishing landscape, whilst Thorhallur will die after bad tortures in Ireland. So this is clearly an ideological framework. I have already said about the prophecy of Thorstein, but I would also add that there's another figure from the pagan Norse, which is a Völva called Þorbjörg, who is asked to be to come to deliver a prophecy. And at that point, she asks to be provided with women who knew the lore needed for the Seiður, the ritual, and the songs called Varlokkur. But no such women were found. So Guðríður, the Christian woman I've already mentioned a few times, the wife of Thorstein, and then the wife of Thorfinnur after Thorstein's death, she says, I am neither versed in magic nor a wise woman, but my foster mother, Halldís, taught me a chant in Iceland, which she called Varlokkur. Þorkell said, then you are fortunate. Guðríður replied, this is one act which I do not want to take part, for I am a Christian woman. Again, this is a strong statement from her. So basically what happens is that she ultimately, after some discussion, agrees to sing these Varlokkur anyway. So Þorbjörg the Völva prophesizes that the famine will end after Thorstein's death, and that Guðríður will enter into 2 prosperous marriages, one in Greenland and one in Iceland, thereby founding a distinguished lineage. We go back to the genealogies I was telling you before. Lineage made of bishops and important figures of the Icelandic 13th century society. So this episode proves that there's a syncretism between Christianity and paganism within the saga. Although the seerest practices seidr, which is a form of pagan magic often associated to shamanism, the intervention of Guðríður's voice seems to bring the event back within the bounds of acceptability. Why? Because she's a Christian woman. Suggesting that a form of religious syncretism is present, and that because paganism is accommodated within a now Christianized framework society, provided that these practices are interpreted through Christian lens. This, for example, does not occur in the episode of the beach.
Professor, you muted. Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we are back.
Have I been muted all the time?
No. Only, I think, about 10 seconds ago.
All right, perfect. So
you have to upload the file again. The presentation was closed.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Didn't expect that.
It's okay. Pouco de paciência que o professor teve problema técnico. Okay, we are back.
We are back. So yeah, as I was saying, this sort of normalization within a Christian framework of the pagan belief does not happen in the episode of the beached whale, in the episode of Thorhallur. That's one of the reasons why I think he ends up being tortured and killed in Ireland, while this episode here with the vulva, with the presence of Guðríður, who sorts of mediates between paganism and the new Christian faith, makes the whole thing, the whole ritual, more acceptable within the boundaries of acceptability. Let's move on to the 2 figures of Guðríður and Freydís. The 2 figures are very different. Guðríður is a very positive exemplar of Christian woman, while Freydís is a cruel and violent woman, as I said before. Freydís is violent in a way that she kills 5 women without thinking twice. She treats the Skrællingar, the native inhabitants of Vínland, as búfé, so livestock, just like animals. She's very violent also against her husband, and she convinces him to kill her brothers during her expeditions to Vínland. She's one of Eiríks' daughters, children. She has 2 brothers who have not been mentioned earlier, but still she travels with them for a final expedition to Vínland in Grænlendinga saga, and she convinces her husband with a lie, saying a lie, that her brothers have sort of offended her, and she so causes this clash between her husband and his men and her brothers, and she has her brothers killed. So she's a really ruthless woman, and in some manuscripts this episode is titled Freydís Atrocities in Vínland. Ódæðisverk Freydísar á Vínlandi. Guðríður is a different woman, as I said, a good example of Christian. And one episode that struck the attention is when she meets one of the Skrællingar, one of the native inhabitants of Vínland. A shadow, quote, fell across the doorway, and the woman entered wearing a black cloak, rather short in stature, with a hood over her head and light brown hair, pale-skinned with very large eyes, larger than had ever been seen in a human head. She walked over to where Guðríður was sitting and said, "What is your name?" Guðríður replied, "My name is Guðríður, and what is yours?" "My name is Guðríður," said the woman. So there's a sort of doppelganger of Gudridur in this episode. So unlike Freydis, Gudridur doesn't kill the native women, doesn't call them livestock. She welcomes instead the stranger and invites her in. Yet at that very moment, cries from the outside announce the beginning of a conflict, and the mysterious visitor disappears. And also, it is also strange that they understood each other's languages. So why is it so? It can be speculated, this is my speculation, of course, that this native doppelganger of Gudridur serves as a further indication of her key role as a model figure, even in an exotic and mysterious setting as the exploration of the new land. She is still repaid for her kindness, in a way taken as example, as model by this foreign exotic woman who enters her hut. Finally, the final narrative device that I have found is the description of the natural landscapes in Vinland. Because the question of many scholars have asked themselves is Vinland too good to be true? Could it be influenced by the earthly paradise literary topos that was so widespread in the Middle Ages? Is it enhanced in order to captivate the audience or to apply categories of Christian imagination? Categories of Christian imagination, such as I said, the earthly paradise. Such abundance, says Larrington, is typical of the New World, but not necessarily rooted in the actual archaeology of the landscape in northern Canada, in Northern America, in that area of Canada where the settlements were found. Hyperfertility is a recognizable trope of medieval and early modern travel writing, which is true. Though the narrative may draw on lived experience, the locus amenus tradition and the idea of earthly paradise are not far away. I agree with Larrington in this. So there's probably a portion of truth, but also embellished a lot with these typical motifs of travel narratives. Some examples. Labor found men shipwrecked and brought them home with him. In doing so, he showed the greatest generosity and honor. He introduced Christianity to the land, and he was thereafter called Labor the Lucky. I have already mentioned this episode, but I think it is important that this exploration also leads to this aspect of labor, of his Christian generosity. Then he goes on, and the description is that there was a dew upon the grass, and it so happened that they took the dew into their hands and brought it to their mouths, and it seemed to them that they had never tasted anything that sweet. This is in Grænlendinga saga, actually, but still, it still gives us the idea of how idealized this landscape had been in the sagas. Going on in the description of Vínland in Grænlendinga saga, neither the river nor the lake lacked salmon, and the salmon were larger than any they had previously seen. The land, as it appeared to them, was of such excellent quality that no livestock would require fodder during the winter, no frosts came in winter, and the grasses scarcely withered. Okay, this could be true, but this is also possible that it could be like an exaggerated way to tell the story, to captivate the audience and align with the tradition of medieval travel tropes. At the same time, elements of realism, I have to say, are equally noticeable, particularly, for example, in the detailed and plausible depiction of their movements. We have an example here. They returned to the ship and sailed into the channel lying between the island and the headland that stretched northwards from the mainland. Then they sailed westward past the headland. So basically, we have elements of realism that makes us think that these sailors actually traveled those lands, but they are enriched with many fantastic aspects, probably tropes of earthly paradise and locus amenus and all that. So John Phillips states that Vinland is also a very real land, as the descriptions of the native inhabitants and their hostility made clear, it was certainly no Garden of Eden. And in fact, I did mention the natives and their descriptions and their behavior as probably one of the few realistic aspects of the narratives. But there are also medieval motives, literary motives like these that I have mentioned, that have also been studied by scholars such as Gisli Sigurdsson extensively, and I will have no time to address them all, but these are some of the medieval tropes that might have been used to create the image of Vinland in these sagas, and I believe probably have been used to at least embellish the memory of these travelers. I would like to conclude with Gisli Sigurdsson's words. Even though the Vínland Sagas are literary products, cast in the mold of the dominant form of the time when they were written and colored by the prevailing beliefs and assumptions, they are equally clearly based on memories of former times passed down orally from generation to generation by the people of Iceland. They are not spun out of thin air like creative fiction, and they are most certainly not to be viewed as myths or legends. They can thus be little doubt that they contain genuine memories about actual people and events that took place around the year 1000. But it is equally certain that the saga accounts of these characters and events do not mirror historical reality in every respect. So again, what do we take from this analysis and Gisli's words? The fact that, of course, as it often happens in every aspect of life, truth is in between, in the middle. Truth lies in the middle between a story that was probably really lived, events that were probably really lived and experienced by these people in the year 1000, and the need of their descendants and friends, acquaintances who heard the story to make creative alterations to these stories, and also add motifs that were popular at the time in literature to make it more captivating for the audience and to make them what we actually call proper literature nowadays. Although there was not a concept in the Icelandic Middle Ages, it is what we would call writing literature today, which does not mean being completely detached from reality, from real experiences, but it also means poetically, creatively change the perspective, alter the perspective, alter the facts, the events, make it more, make it closer to our taste, to the taste of the audience, to what we believe would be right for the messages and ideological framework we are trying to convey. Because this is not just embellishment, some sort of adventurous embellishment that we have seen. It's not just for the sake of entertainment that we have aspects that are so clearly elaborated by the author and so clearly creatively elaborated by the authors. But this is also for the objective of sending a message, of placing these stories not only in the framework of Icelandic history from colonization to 13th century Iceland, so not only to create a continuity, historically speaking, between the past and the present, so in terms of cultural common identity of Icelanders, but also to put these stories in a framework of Christianity, and to just sell them as some sort of prefigurations of the Christian faith that would then in a few years become dominant in Iceland. So that's why characters like Leifur, characters like Guðríður and Þorfinnur become so important and so central, especially in comparison with pagan characters or cruel characters like Freydis. this is what I just said, the reasons for these narrative devices to actually be there, embellishment, justifying historical facts, making a connection between past and present, alter the events in favor of a Christian perspective or a positive character offered as a role model for the audience, make sense of genealogical connections. This is it. I think this is more or less everything that I could summarize and synthesize in a short speech. But this topic is, of course, very, very huge. I have written about it in this recent book, and so many scholars, much more experienced and better than me, have done it in the past. So I hope this has at least sort of created some interest in fascination in the audience, in you all, to go and read the sagas, to go and read the critics, the contributions that have been written on it, because this is such an interesting topic. We have here the statue of Leifur Eiríksson in Iceland, in the square just in front of Hallgrímskirkja, just as a eternal reminder of the fact that maybe they did not know exactly that it was a new continent, that it was America, but Norsemen did reach that new land before anyone else, probably. And this is something that it's worth remembering, as we have seen, worth writing about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your time, for your lecture. Now, are you listening to me? Okay, that sounds
yes,
great.
I hear you. Sorry.
Okay.
I hear you well.
So we have some questions on the chat for you. Can you read this one?
What is your opinion?
Yeah.
What is your opinion?
You can read. Okay.
Here you go. No, you go ahead, please. I drink in the meantime.
Okay. It's from Johnny Langer. What's your opinion on the heroicization of Leif Erikson in the United States and his historical role as a European and Christian conqueror in education, commemorations, and the media?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Johnny. And again, thank you for inviting me today. So what I think is, I think it's dangerous, mostly, because a lot of what we know about Leifur is literature, is invention. A lot of what we know about these events and travels is embellished, as I was saying, and the fact that these Norsemen did reach the coasts of America, although they probably believed it was Africa. I read a paper of Sverrir Jakobsson stating that they weren't even aware that it was America at all. Of course, that it was a new continent at all. So basically, I believe that taking to the extreme this simple historical fact to the extreme, that is idealization and heroicization, is always dangerous. Is dangerous whenever we do that, because history, if we are careful and accurate, if we are honest intellectually speaking, if we are faithful to the sources and unbiased, if we try to be unbiased in our analysis, there's no space for heroicization and no space for the idealization in any kind of narrative that is based on an historical fact. It is, of course, tempting, especially for some parts of the American society, especially USA society, United States society, to see in Leifur this forefather, this heroic and adventurous, totally masculine in the most stereotypical way. This masculine hero be the possible forefather, the real discoverer of America. But what I think it's, I see where it comes from, but I think it's dangerous, and part of our job as researchers and scholars is try to make us voices listen to and try to reframe these narratives as much as possible into the framework of reality and of unbiased and accurate factual events that just we need to fact check sometimes it's important for us to try and do that, although heroicization is we cannot stop it from happening. Like I thinking about Assassin's Creed Valhalla and all the video games and all the retellings and TV series. We cannot stop these narratives to be used for to create new kind of narratives. But when this comes to in some cases in the United States, it has come to levels of, it has brought to levels of racism and white supremacy that I believe is just dangerous. And we can do something about it by also divulgate, not only teach on a university level, but also find moments to make divulgative events and just tell the audience that, okay, these narratives exist, but the story is different. It's much more complex. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer. Now I'm going to the question I have translated from Luciana Campos. Let's keep going. The question for Professor Micci. Congratulations on your excellent and enlightenment lecture. Is their storytelling process used in writing the Vínland Sagas the same as in our tradition, or there specific difference between them? Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. We don't really know what was going on in the oral transmission of the texts. This is the first thing that I have to say. We weren't there to hear these stories and how they were altered and embellished and all that. But we know that some of these topics, some of these tropes, these literary motifs that might have influenced the narratives did have roots in the oral tradition. For example, Gisli Sigurdsson, one of the scholars who has studied the sagas more than anyone, he's convinced that legendary locations such as that have come into the Icelandic folklore, such as Ódáin, Svetlir, or Vitramannaland, they might have been influenced by the oral Irish folklore tradition, because a good amount of Irish people was brought to Iceland or came to Iceland during the process of colonization, and they believe that, for instance, some of their oral folklore tradition was somehow merged with the Norse folklore tradition, and these oral narratives might have found their ways into also the literary written sources that we have. So the thing is that what I believe is that what is the aspects of the narratives that are more rooted in folklore and legends of the past, of the pagan Scandinavia or even Irish lands, they are most probably they come most certainly from the oral tradition. Also, some of the core elements like the relationships with the natives. But I believe that what is more the aspects of the narratives that are more centered on the Christian aspects, the Christian values, the Christian tradition, like the earthly paradise topos, the locus amenos topos, which is also mentioned a lot in Isidore of Sevilla etymologies. I believe that those aspects have a purely literary origin, because they come from an old literary tradition, and the Christian ideology is by definition a written transmitted through written texts. So I sort of distinguish between, in my humble opinion, I sort of distinguish between these two different kinds of elements, the folklore, legendary elements, and the more Christian ones, the one that are more obviously rooted in the Christian tradition. and I think the second one probably just have a completely literary origin. Beyond this, it's really hard to say how the oral retelling was took place and what it was made of, especially.
Thank you so much. Now we are going to someone called André Oliveira. Considering the considering the power relations are asymmetrical in your view, that to what extent did the fact that some characters are Christian influence the narrative's reliability for the reader? Is there an example of which the narrative becomes dubious because it's told by a non-Christian?
Well, not really. I don't recall at the moment any episodes in the saga when a non-Christian character becomes less reliable for telling a story compared to a Christian character. Also, because the focus is so clearly on Christian characters that apart from the Vulva episode and the Thorhallur episode, the beached whale episode, there's not much else. We don't really hear those clearly pagan characters speak openly in the sagas. It's mostly focused on Leifur, Bjarni, Thorfinnur, Guðríður, which are Christian characters. Of course, when these pagan characters come up in the front, they are either, as I was saying, they are either legitimized by their interaction with Christian characters like Guðríður and the Vulva, or completely dismissed in a very awful ways, like Thorhallur when he reaches Ireland after the beach whale scene. But I believe that the legitimation that comes from the Christian characters is so important to the author, also because, for example, in the genealogies in the end of the sagas, we have a focus on Guðríður and Thorfinnur, the two Christian characters, and their lineage, which is a lineage of bishops and important cultural figures. And we are also told that one of their descendants, I think Brandur, is the source of the Grænlendinga saga story. So we are told that Brandur, the story has been told and by the mouth of Brandur, who is the descendant of Guðríður, the great grandson of Guðríður and Thorfinnur. So this is a total case of legitimation through the Christian faith. So this is totally asymmetrical, as you were saying, and almost exclusively the reliability of the story is almost exclusively given to associated with the Christian characters.
Okay.
In my opinion, yes.
Okay. It was just a curiosity because I studied Christianity, so I was asking myself about that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, now we have a question from our in-home Italian, Lorenzo Sterla. The question of Lorenzo: question from your chapter, literary roots to the New World in Quanter Americi. Sorry, don't speak Italian. How can your reading in the Vínland Saga help Brazilians reread the colonial sources more critically? This is a question he wrote, I think, 3 times on our private chat. One was a question with 10 lines, so he shortened it about, I think, 2 lines. This is the last the last version of the question.
What's his name again?
Lorenzo.
Ciao Lorenzo. Grazie della domanda. The question is really difficult to answer because I have no clue of colonial sources about Brazil and anything like that. Really, I'm sorry, but I really don't know anything about that. But as I was saying when it came to Johnny's question, I do believe that if there's at least one good thing that we can do as scholars is to promote a critical reading and thinking, a critical reading of the sources, a critical thing, and also just put yourself, even when you read sources that appear to be completely reliable, to put yourself in doubt, put the source in doubt, put yourself in doubt, and just try to see all the points of views of the question of the matter, without really excluding anything, although it takes time and effort, and it's tiring sometimes. That's why research takes time, although nowadays our university and ministries of education try to make also our kind of research as something that has to be like sort of to follow the rhythm and the pace of modern society, but actually reading the sources and studying matters like these takes time. Takes courage to also to break the common perspectives and go against the common, sometimes the common feeling. But it is really important to stick to the truth of the sources and or the archaeology. And I believe, I will say this, as I say in the book, I believe that interdisciplinary approaches are more and more important in our fields. Putting together archaeology, anthropology, literature, in order to make these our points of view, our researches, sort of bulletproof, like so even more reliable and credible, so that when we say something, it doesn't come out from thin air. This is well rooted in everything that and that's why collaborations between us, experts of various fields, is so important, I think. So I don't really know how it can help with the Brazilian colonial sources, but
Lorenzo was asking. Sorry, Professor.
In terms of methodology, it can help.
The broad explanation I posted here in our private chat.
Yeah. Okay.
If you can read it, please,
See,
for the viewers.
You show that the Vínland Sagas construct an Icelandic colonial memory situated between remembrance and fiction. From a Brazilian perspective, still marked by the discourses of discovery and by the erasure of indigenous people, how can your reading of the sagas help us critically reinterpret our own colonial sources? Well, it's still hard.
It's a tricky question.
It is still hard for me because I don't know much about this Brazilian history. But
I think
there is something in common between still the North American history and the Brazilian histories, which is this erasure of indigenous people, probably. So the erasure of the culture and memory, and this sort of this substitution of the culture of the settler with the culture of the settler substituting the culture of those who inhabited the area already. I do believe that what we can take from this reading of the sources like Vínland Sagas is that there's no text which is unbiased, which is really unbiased. Not even our text, when we try to make the most unbiased and careful and accurate readings and interpretations of text, it is not. It is never completely unbiased. So, but we can try, I think, we can do our best to reach, to be the most unbiased possible, to be the most careful and accurate possible, which is never perfection. We can never reach that level of perfection of perfect objectivity. We cannot never reach that. But by using multiple point of views, involving colleagues from different fields, sticking as much as possible to the facts, and sticking to the simple fact that no narrative is unbiased, we can at least propose interpretations. We can propose that new readings of sources, of events, which the important thing is that we don't try to sell those as the absolute objective truth. We just say, this is my perspective, this is my point of view, my reinterpretation of a certain source that is based on these facts, these evidence, these reflections, but this is my take on this. This is my take on Vínland Sagas. And I based it on this, and that. But you're free to go against this perspective tomorrow with new evidence and new thinking and new ideas. This is what we do. The important is that we base it as much as possible, which is not perfect, but as much as possible on the facts that we have available.
Sorry, it was a tricky question. I understand.
No, you don't have to be sorry. It's good to have tricky questions. I'm just sorry that I don't really have that can't really relate to the Brazilian history almost at all, because I don't know much. But I think it's in terms of how we approach sources and how the methodology that we use, and just be honest, because if we are honest about the fact that we propose readings of something and that that are not the absolute truth, as long as we do it with a good, honest, correct methodology, what we are writing is worth it, I think. And this can also subverse some colonialist narrative as well, I think. The honesty and methodology, these two pillars.
Thank you so much for your answer. Now, let me see if you have another question. I think we don't have any more questions. Again,
I speak a lot also when I reply questions, because when it's not my native language, I am always afraid not to be completely understood. So I realize that I tend to repeat myself a lot and make you lose a lot of time. But so sorry for that. But thank you for your patience.
It's okay. It's okay. It's not an issue. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your lecture. Now I'm going to speak in Portuguese for the viewers. Obrigado pelo tempo de todos. E eu convido a todos aqui presentes para agora à tarde ao minicurso 2, Sagas e Literatura, com a professora Luciana Campos, e também seria ministrado pelo professor Pablo, mas ele teve imprevisto, que irá começar às 3 horas da tarde. E assim eu encerro a segunda conferência. Muito obrigado. Tchau.
Tchau.